Welcome to Cash Talk, the podcast where we delve into the depths of finance, business, and life itself. I'm your host, John Cachia, a multi-award-winning wealth advisor with a passion for empowering ambitious Australians to confidently achieve financial freedom. Hey everyone, before we get started, this is a quick reminder that everything in this podcast is of a general nature and nothing has been tailored to your personal circumstances. So please seek personal financial advice before acting on this information. Hello everyone and welcome back to Cash Talk, and once again I'm joined by Ayten. Ayten, how are you?
Good, John, how are you?
Yeah, not bad. I'm pumped to get into this topic today because we're going to be talking about intergenerational wealth, and it's something that's very important for us to consider in today's day and age, because in Australia we're about to go through the massive change of hands when it comes from baby boomers' wealth to millennials, and it's something that we're going to experience over the next 10 to 20 years. So if you are in that kind of boomer age group, it's around, how do we transition that to the next generation? And for the millennials, it's how do you receive that? And then what do you do with it? And then what's the problems and issues? And there's so many. And it was only even yesterday where I was speaking to someone that was in this camp, and it's something that we have a conversation with clients about often. So it's something that I'm eager to dive into and talk about. I was having a look at some of the numbers, and it's quite astounding how much is actually going to pass through. I think it's nearly $4 trillion, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. In like 20, 30 years, it's going to be about $4 trillion. At the moment, it's probably about $1.5 billion of inheritance each year. So you can imagine how that's going to grow over the coming, decades. I guess the most important thing is, how is it? And what, how does it kind of transfer? And some of the ways that we can, tackle how we can improve literacy for obviously people who are transferring the wealth, but also people, like you mentioned, receiving the wealth.
Yeah, so the main way it's transferring is obviously in regards to death. So it's the baby boomers who are passing away, and then from them passing away, that money is going to their children, their grandchildren, or whatever. Now, obviously, there's other ways which it is happening where, we've got the bank of mum and dad happening, where we're passing down assets and passing down wealth through to the next generation to give them a better helping hand. And let's be honest, it is getting much, much harder, especially when it talks about like buying a house and stuff like that. There is generations that talk about, it was as hard as my time. The numbers don't lie. Like today's generation is harder, and it's going to get a hell of a lot harder, which we'll discuss as well. So there's a lot of ways in which the wealth is passing through. What's interesting to see is that how the wealthy are doing it, how we're also advising our clients to do it, and the people that are kicking this issue down the road. And I was recently writing an article about this around people at the moment, the decisions that they're making, the impact that that's not just making on them, the impact that that's having on their kids and their grandkids. And I'm talking about, like, for example, if you buy that car that you want, that not that you need, what's the impact to your children and your grandchildren? And I know that people are there going, oh yeah, but John, I really want the car and I only live life once. Like, yes, I understand that, but it's a nice, even balance. And what I hope for people to learn from what's going on is that ultimately the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And you've got to choose which side of the fence you're ultimately on. No one's going to be there to help you and your family and push you in the right direction. You've either got to go seek it yourself or employ someone to help you to put your family on the right side of the fence. Because when you're talking about $4 trillion passing through, and I know it's a big number, but if we kind of even took that as a household perspective, even if someone has $1 million and someone who doesn't have $1 million, that extra $1 million is a massive leg up for the person that can pass that down.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you've got to base your decisions, yes, on today, yes, on your lifestyle, but then what are you doing for the next generation? And I know, Ayten, we spoke about, like, for example, for my children who, I started their wealth journey before they were born, and so if I can keep it up and continue to have the consistency and do what I need to do and then pass on the knowledge to them, they've got my lifetime of their wealth growing.
Yeah.
They've then got their lifetime of their wealth growing, plus they've got my wealth passing down to them, then and also my parents' wealth passing down to them. And for someone who does that and then versus someone who doesn't do that, like it's just a stark difference. And I don't like it.
Yeah.
You know, ethically speaking, I don't like it. I wish everyone did this. I wish everyone was on an even playing field and everyone had the same opportunities. But the reality is that is not the case. Yeah. And does that mean that, you know, I have to then, you know, grab my wealth to then give it to the people that aren't putting in the effort?
Yeah.
I also don't like that as well. So people who then come out and say, you know, the rich are getting richer and tax the rich and whatever. Well, most people get rich because of the hard work and the decisions they make.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, so I just don't see it being fixed. So if it's not going to be fixed by external sources, what can you do for you and your family? What can you control?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question because, as you mentioned, I think there's going to be a growing gap between the people, the haves and the have-nots. And that's really difficult to comprehend as an advisor because you want everyone to be on the same playing level field. So why is someone who's, you know, doesn't have any control over their finances, why are they disadvantaged over someone who has just happened to be born in a, you know, a wealthy family? I think maybe go back to the topic of you're saying, okay, how do the wealthy do it? And why is it so different from other people? What are the things that they're employing that is different from anyone else?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is around, as Bruce Lee puts it, don't give your kids what you didn't have, teach them what you didn't know. Yeah. And so what the wealthy are doing is, what they're learning about wealth creation, they're instilling into their children as early as possible. And you can see through, you know, my social media channels, like my two eldest boys just mimicking me.
Yeah.
You know, they just want to be mini dad. They want to be mini mum.
Yeah.
And so first and foremost, the wealthy or the educated, I'm going to say, whatever you want your children to learn, starts with you as the role model. Yep. You know, there's insane stats that like parents who, you know, eat well and are fit, the levels of obesity in their children reduces drastically. Like the parents who smoke and then their kids, like this is the same when it comes to wealth.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about what the wealthy do, one, they've got they're role modeling the right behavior. Two, the real wealthy, and they're really smart in this way, don't keep their money away from their children, this kind of taboo of don't talk about it. And what happens is that they talk about their wealth as the family's wealth. This is ours, yeah?
Yep.
Not mine, ours. You will get it once you've worked your way through the stages in regards to financial literacy.
Yep.
So there's always this talk about the continuity of wealth.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it's not this segregation. And you look at some of the wealthiest families and you can see what I'm talking about here. And I come from a family where money was taboo to talk about. And like most common Australian families, it was like, don't talk about it. You know, don't talk about how much you earn, don't talk about this.
Yeah.
Well, if you're not talking about it, how are the kids learning?
Yeah.
So it's really around role modeling the right behavior, talking about it, and then the next bit is around actually teaching them. And you've got two ways to teach. Like obviously you've got to learn yourself and then teach your children.
Yeah.
Or you've got to make this a priority. You know, if you want your kids to be great at soccer, how much effort and time do you put into soccer? 2 nights a week training, playing on the weekend. How much time do you put towards your kids' wealth?
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about money wealth. I'm talking about just being a good person as well and being fulfilled and grateful and all of those things that come with life, because you don't want to turn them into this like greedy little, you know, kid. And so you have to start hopefully start as early as possible, and that's what the wealthy do. However, if you're finding yourself that you've got adult children, or if maybe you don't have children and it's something that you want to, you're with your parents, and your parents, how can you have those open conversations before the time comes where one's dead, one needs to pass, and you're just like, I've got all this money, what do I do with it?
Yeah.
Yesterday I had a kid, and a young guy, 25 years of age. Unfortunately, his dad passed away in a motorbike accident. He finds himself in a scenario with 2 properties, a life insurance policy, some superannuation, and very, very fortunate, the estate planning lawyer that's working with him says, you have to go see Thriving Wealth. Like, please go see them. And he was very open-minded, came into the conversation going, listen, this is not my area of expertise at all. I've never come into this type of money before. What do I do? And we went through, obviously, the mechanics of what we're going to do for him from like a financial perspective. However, my biggest focus for this person was, we need to educate you. We need to spend heaps and heaps and heaps of time, because his father, passed away, but he didn't pass the knowledge of how he got those properties, got that wealth to then pass on to his son. And that was just yesterday.
Yeah.
This happens all the time. This guy was very receptive to learning, and he actually said that the reason why I'm going with Thriving Wealth was because of the education that we provide. And it's something that, everything we're talking to today is not shock to me. It's not like something's just gone, oh my gosh, 4 trillion is going to come past.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at the demographics of Australia and the world, there's a big portion of post-World War II babies, and that wealth is going to be passed. So, I had to make sure that I set up this business to accommodate for that passing of that wealth as well. And education's a big one, because families continue not to do this at home. The wealthy continue to do it. And if I want to be there to try and bridge that gap as best as I can.
Yeah.
So that's what the wealthy do. And that's how it works in reality.
Yeah, a couple of things that you touched on there. So obviously we know that the wealthy, the bulk of the wealth is tied up with the baby boomers.
Yeah.
And we're living longer now. So when people start to inherit, they're not going to be in their 20s like one of the clients that you just mentioned. They're going to be in their 50s or 60s. So at that point, if you're not, you haven't grasped or been educated, it's even more difficult at that stage to understand and know what you're going to be doing with that money and how to best utilize those funds. So obviously the education part is really important. But again, you mentioned, like, from our background, like you said, it's taboo. It's rude to ask about how much someone is earning. It's rude to talk about money. But actually, we need to talk about it, like you mentioned, because if we don't talk about it, how are we educating ourselves? How are we educating our kids? How do they know what to do with, $500,000 or $1 million or $2 million? It's more like they'll blow it potentially. And that kind of like leads me to the next question is, we hear about the generational curse. We've got the couple of generations, 3 generations. Maybe talk to us about the generations and how it kind of works.
Yeah.
Why does the 3rd generation always blow the money?
So a few things is, let's just paint the picture around why they blow, but also around how the reality is of this wealth actually transferring. So let's paint the picture of a 30, 40-year-old couple right now, indebted to the hill. Their parents have got superannuation, but not a lot, because they started to accumulate superannuation in the 90s, They've come to retirement now. They're living off the age pension. They've got the age pension and they're living off superannuation. They've got their house that's fully paid off, okay? I probably summed up about 60 to 70% of the Australian community population right now. But the children are indebted to the hill. They live YOLO. They get the latest cars, the latest houses. They don't invest for their financial future. They've got young children. They educate them as best as they can because that's what their parents told them. Their parents pass away. They've got a fully paid off house. They've got minimum in superannuation. they're obviously not going to get the age pension because it doesn't pass on to the next generation. Cool. Most people then grab that money and they whack it into the high mortgage, pay off a couple of cars, and then what happens? They fall into the same behaviours. The equity in their house grows.
Yeah.
They release the equity, inevitably taking away the inheritance that they're having to keep up with the lifestyle. Find themselves back into the same position of their parents. Luckily enough, they've got enough superannuation because they've been contributing the whole time. Gets to retirement, superannuation is fully withdrawn, which you know is not the best idea.
Yeah.
Fully withdrawn, pumped into the debt that they haven't paid off. And then what happens to the kids? You've just modelled the exact same behaviour.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not worse, they've got more accessibility to credit. Yeah. Meanwhile, that's the average family. Meanwhile, the wealthy family, they lived within their means. This is the parents, the boomers. They live within their means. They've got a really healthy superannuation balance because they realised that superannuation was a great tax-effective vehicle. They maxed out their super contributions. They didn't do everything. And so they've got themselves to a scenario where they're actually not on the age pension now. They've got a nice house. It's a modest house. It's nothing too flash. They're living off their superannuation and they might get a small part pension or they might not get anything, okay? They've modelled for their children self-sufficiency. Well, you need to build up enough. You need to live within your means. And those children, yes, they have nice things, probably nicer than their parents because they've just had more accessibility to stuff, but they've understood they need to work their ass off and they need to remodel themselves.
Yeah.
Their parents pass away. They pass off with a fully paid off house, superannuation still intact, and then pass it on to kids who paid off their debt and have full superannuation. Oh my gosh, the difference, the stark difference between one generation to the other. Now, the likelihood of that generation blowing it is reduced substantially based on the fact that they worked their butt off, modelled their behaviours over a long period of time over the wise, wealthy parents. Now, they then pass away. That inheritance lasted their generation because they didn't need it. Ultimately, what they were doing is actually just keeping that wealth for the next generation because they didn't need it.
Yeah.
They built it themselves. So all they're doing is compounding over their lifetime to then when their kids go, they've now inherited 2 generations. So by the time you get to the Zoomers or the Alphas, which is the Alphas are this generation now, being born. Wow. Like the difference between the two is something that Australia has never seen before. You know, it scares me. And I know we've talked offline about this, about how much it actually scares me because it's the point in which Australia didn't grow up like this for me. You know, we had a huge middle class. Inflation's already killing it. Throw on intergenerational wealth where, just so the stats behind this, the first generation 70% blow it, if not taught well. Second generation, about 90% of it, pretty much gone in 2 generations. Yeah. You teach financial literacy and you model what we've been talking about today, probability increases substantially in regards to retaining. Retain that for 100 years, so 2 generations.
Yeah. How do you retain it though? I mean, you know, you've got boomers, they've got a couple of $1 million tied up in property, they've got superannuation, like you mentioned, they want to help their kids out. Obviously, it's harder to buy a property these days. I think the stats were you've got to save for 10 years to buy your first property. That's a long time to be saving. And they want to help their kids out. But then the second part of that is that, okay, well, your child is now with someone, but you don't want to be giving your child money for someone else to be living in a property or they divorce. So, like, what are some of the things or the ways, estate planning wise, obviously we're not lawyers, but some of the things that we can...
And you can do to protect yourself. So, a few things is, when it comes to family law, they've got like a magic wand that can kind of break through nearly everything, okay? However, there's structures that you can have to pass through wealth. So things like testamentary trusts and discretionary trusts are very good. So a discretionary trust is essentially an entity that gets set up where the assets can be held in this trust on behalf of beneficiaries. Beneficiaries are not entitled to the income that generates it. So what I mean by that is that they can't say, I am guaranteed to have $50,000. It's a discretionary trust. You can it's what the word says is that your discretion in the way you want to distribute the money. And there's obviously different aspects around discretionary trust, but what's really, really good about it is the continuity of wealth. So because it's not owned by Ayten and it's owned by a trust, when you kind of pass away, inside that trust deed, another person can assume it. Even when you're not dead and you're alive, you can then pass that to your kids. So let's say, for example, let's say you've got an asset, okay? Let's just call it a stock, okay? If you have that stock and you retain that stock, let's say after 30 years, it's accumulated so much that you have $1 million capital gain if you sell it and then pass it down to your child. If that was held in a discretionary trust, you could then just change the structure inside that trust, okay, which I call about trustees and stuff like that, to have the child control that asset via the trust. So trusts are very important in regards to intergenerational wealth because of the continuity of how that works. The thing is, however, what I want people to know is that there is a big misconception that when you die, capital gains is triggered. I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
Death is not a capital gain event. Okay? So what I mean by that is if my parents say pass away, okay, and that asset from the estate gets kind of passed down to me and I am now the new owner of that asset, what I am doing is assuming the cost base of that asset, okay? However, all I am doing for like capital gains and stuff like that is kicking the can down the road, aren't I? So it's around when you use trusts, be a discretionary trust if you're alive or a testamentary trust, which is kind of a discretionary trust when you die and it just has some more tax effectiveness and asset protection. It gives you more options is what I like to say. So, you know, it will be very, very likely in my structure that each of my children will have their own family trusts that we build assets for each of the families, because with my 3 children, like you alluded to, later down the track, they're going to have their own marriages, they're going to have their own whatever. And so if one of my sons is in a relationship, I want assets segregated so you can chop off a limb and you don't need to chop off the head.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so trusts are really good for segregation of assets. However, the group itself is how I look at it. So, for example, I have 9 different entities right now. And people are like, what are you talking about? 9 different entities. Every single one of them has a purpose. So, it isn't for the faint-hearted going down this route. It depends on how full-on you want to be. And obviously, as you accumulate wealth, it becomes more and more important because as you build it, it's like, I want to protect it.
Yeah.
Okay? So, however, even if you did none of that, the biggest contributing factor is the behavior in which the person receiving the money. Because if you look at celebrities, you look at sports stars, you look at lotto winners, when they get a significant amount of money and they haven't been taught how to manage it, gone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see it with sports players, for example. You know, they've been playing sport for a number of years, getting paid millions of dollars, and then at the end of it, they've got like nothing.
It's because, like, how did it happen?
Yeah, that's right. Because they're all about the flash, you know. I mean, we do it all the time. We see someone driving a nice car and we're like, oh, yeah, that must be, how do they afford that? They must be rich. Meanwhile, they've got a loan or whatever it is on the car, which is a topic for a different day. But, yeah, like interesting points that you've made there. And I think it all kind of goes back to the behaviour, doesn't it? It's all about what behaviours do you have, what conversations are you having with your children, and from an early age as well, because, you know, once you're 50, you can't instill those kind of behaviours at 50, or maybe you can, but it's harder to do that at that stage.
And also as well too, I think it's the conversations with the parents that go underestimated as well. So like, for example, if like you want to you know that at one stage, I know they hopefully live forever, but at one stage my parents are going to pass away. You know, I've come to the reality that that is going to happen.
Yeah.
So have I started the conversations with my parents around how's that going to transition? How is that going to transition to me and my siblings in not only the way that they want, but in the best way for our family?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we started that conversation years ago so that when it does happen, not only is everyone on the same page, which is huge when it comes to estate planning, but when that happens, people aren't getting their hands on it that they shouldn't, like the tax office or fees and charges. And like it should be this smooth sailing process. And I have seen obviously both sides of this. I've seen when people have done it really bad and it's all gone. And I've seen where people have done it really well. And the ones who do it at an elite level, educate first, then pass the money. Yeah? And I just can't emphasize enough that if you think that this is more important than your kids playing basketball or soccer or whatever, you need to be having these conversations. You need to be talking about this intergenerational wealth. It is something that we're going to see where we have different classes. Like we already start to see people in lower socioeconomic and middle class socioeconomic fuel debt to live up to the wealthy's lifestyle.
Yeah. It's concerning, isn't it? With all the buy now, pay later, you can get your pay now if you can't afford something. Like it's insane.
So just think about how big in just our maybe 20 or 30 years, how quickly that has changed, what the next 20 to 30 years is going to look like.
Yeah.
And so get acting on this. You know, you need to go, if you look at yourself in the mirror and say like, I don't know what I'm doing, you need to go seek help. Like if you think that your wealth and your financial future for you and your family is very important to you, don't muck around. Yeah. And yeah, I just see this so important, and I know that this is going to be on record, and hopefully people go back to this as John's warning. Just don't muck around with it. And there's ways to do it, which hopefully we've given some really good nuggets today in regards to the way that works.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's also very complex, and I don't underestimate that. It's not a simple kind of you're just coming from one angle, write this piece of paper and you're done.
Yeah.
There is so many different angles. You know, tax effectiveness, asset protection, behavioural side, education, mindset, role modelling your behaviour. But, you know, I put health up here, number one, and then like wealth here.
Yeah.
And then everything else kind of flows from that in my household. And I've been very fortunate in my wife coming on board with that because I've believed in that from a very young age. And then, you know, now my parents are on board with it, and for my own household, and obviously now all the hundreds, if not thousands of clients, they're on board of my philosophy, and we're starting to see the fruits of what's going on in our households and in our clients' households as well too. And the touching things is where I hear people say like, you know, we've broken through generational curses on their families, for example. Like, you know, you hear things like, I wish my parents told me this, and now that I know this, my kids will never need to go through that path. And it gets me emotional.
Yeah.
You know, and you hopefully, you know, everyone sees how emotional this gets me, because changing people's lives is very, very important for me. And I just can see this danger happening, and I just want to try and protect as many people as I can. I think this is a platform that I'm trying to use to help.
Yeah. And I think, like for me, coming from a financial planning background, but a different financial planning background to what Thriving Wealth is, and to be able to have those conversations, but also to educate. It's not just about the monetary side of things, it's the behavioural side of things, which is so important and I think often gets missed. But I can see it in the clients. They're like, I want my kids to be able to invest. I want my kids to be able to understand. I want to bring them in this conversation. I think that's a great starting point.
100%. And I think the biggest thing is that, like I spoke about before, we're teaching people and you guys about first you creating the right behaviors so that you can model it for your children. You can only empower others with knowledge once you've assumed the knowledge yourself.
Yeah, correct.
And so that is why I have so much focus on it. If we didn't focus on behaviors and we didn't focus on education, essentially we're just putting a Band-Aid on the problem. You think that, like, honestly, if you had $1 million in X share versus $1 million in Y share, if the kid that inherits to doesn't have the right behaviors, could not give a stuff what share you're in, they're likely going to blow it. Mm-hmm. The only way to fix that is change the behaviors, model yourself, change the behaviors, make sure that person is mentally prepared for that to come through. And then there's a difference between X share and Y share.
Yeah, correct.
So it's just we focus more on the core problem, fix that, and then build on the other things. And you can kind of do both at the same time. But if you had to say to me which one's more important, it's definitely the one we're focusing on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this has been a pretty insightful conversation.
Definitely. Thanks, everyone, for joining on this episode. And if you've liked it, please follow us on our social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks. Have a great one. Cheers.